This lesson is answering the question, what is the relationship or connection between homeostasis, respiration, and transport? Remember that homeostasis is an important biological concept, the concept of maintaining internal stability. Organisms have to maintain internal stability in order to survive. To do that, they sometimes use a negative feedback mechanism. That's what's illustrated here. Some factor that has to stay in balance, pH levels, heart rate, maybe it's oxygen levels. Something has to maintain or be in balance in the internal environment. If it becomes out of balance, either too high or too low, a receptor or nerve ending picks that up. That message is sent to a control center, usually the brain. The brain then responds by sending a message to an effector. Effectors are typically muscles or glands. And those muscles or glands will work to correct that problem. So for example, if your body temperature is rising, a receptor picks that up, sends a message to the hypothalamus of your brain, which then sends a message to an effector, in this case muscles and glands like sweat glands, so that your body temperature can return back to normal. Or blood vessels, the muscles, that can divert your blood to the surface of your skin. You turn red, but it dissipates your heat. Other times, homeostasis is maintained by a positive feedback mechanism, where instead of correcting the imbalance spirals and continues to increase in its dramatic response until the cycle gets broken. Birth is a great example of that. So is your immune response, where your body's response continues to cycle up. The contractions for this woman in labor get harder and harder and harder until the baby's born and the feedback stops. Positive feedback. In this case, the baby's head pushing against the cervix is going to stimulate the brain to release a hormone, oxytocin. The oxytocin causes the uterine muscles to contract. That cycle continues to increase until the baby's born. Here we can see homeostasis in terms of the circulatory system, where this system is working to maintain the internal stability of organs and cells that are inside the body. In this case, the problem is not enough oxygen, too much carbon dioxide. That's the result of cellular respiration. Respiration takes oxygen and sugar, breaks it down into carbon dioxide and water. But that carbon dioxide has to be removed. It's the lungs' job to remove the carbon dioxide from the body. But individual cells are trying to get rid of that carbon dioxide so that it doesn't throw the cell out of balance. In this case, the circulatory system helps to do that by having a high concentration of oxygen in the blood vessels and a low concentration of carbon dioxide allows those cells to diffuse oxygen into the cell and carbon dioxide out of the cell. By carrying away the carbon dioxide, it keeps a low concentration of carbon dioxide outside of the cells, so body cells can pour their carbon dioxide into the bloodstream just passively through diffusion, then into the lungs, and it can go out. Here's that same idea on a cellular level. In this case, the circulatory system is bringing nutrients in. So nutrients in high concentration in the blood are diffusing into body cells that need it. Waste products in the cell are being diffused out into the bloodstream. The endocrine system works to maintain hormone levels. Hormones often target organs and cells to act differently. In this case, we have the situation of low blood sugar. So if there's low blood sugar, then the pancreas releases glucagon. Glucagon targets the liver. The liver releases sugar into the bloodstream to raise the blood sugar levels. If the blood sugar levels are too high, for example, after we eat a dessert like a cupcake, that sugar diffuses from our intestines into our bloodstream. The blood sugar level goes up. The pancreas receives that message from a receptor, releases insulin, a hormone that targets body cells and the liver to accept or help increase the diffusion of glucose out of the bloodstream and into the body cells to keep it balanced. The way insulin works is insulin will target a receptor on the surface of the cell that opens a protein channel, which allows glucose to diffuse into the cell. So a diabetic is going to take an insulin injection. That's going to open those glucose channels, allowing that sugar to diffuse into the cell. So this is homeostasis at a cellular level. Cells need that glucose with oxygen for cellular respiration. So consider again, not just the human body maintains homeostasis, and not just body systems maintaining homeostasis of the body, but individual cells have to maintain homeostasis. So here we have a high concentration of nutrients in the bloodstream. We have a high concentration of waste like carbon dioxide in the cell. Those waste products are moving out and those nutrients are moving in just through the processes of diffusion, facilitated diffusion. The blood flow direction can be important because so long as those waste products are carried away, that means the concentration of the waste are lower outside the cell compared to inside. And so long as the blood is filled with nutrients, then the concentration of nutrients is higher outside the cell and can move into the cell. By removing those wastes and keeping the cell supplied with nutrients, it maintains the internal environment of the cell. But what if the cell grew too big? Would diffusion work as well if the cell is too large? So let's take a look at an answer to that question. Here are 3 cells. They all have waste inside the cells. If those waste products like carbon dioxide are moving around randomly, then in the first, smallest cell, the chances of them encountering the membrane and diffusing out are fairly large. But once the cell gets too big, as those molecules are moving around randomly, the chance that they will reach that membrane and diffuse begins to get smaller. As a result, waste products accumulate in the cell. They're unable to diffuse out. That cell can no longer maintain homeostasis, and then that large cell either divides into smaller cells or dies as a result. So there's our molecule diffusing. Notice in cell 2 it will diffuse equally as far, and in cell 3 it will diffuse equally as far. But only in cell 1, the small cell, was the waste product able to diffuse out of the cell. Sometimes cells use active transport, that is, going from an area of low concentration to an area of high concentration. In this case, energy is required. So amino acids are transported by active transport. That is, energy is expended to get those amino acids into the cell where there's an area of higher concentration. A sugar is also transported with the use of some energy. Remember that insulin is required, and there's a protein channel that has to open in order for glucose to be diffused into the cell. So what's the role of respiration? Well, remember, respiration is simply taking sugar and oxygen and using that to make ATP. ATP is going to be necessary for things like active transport. It's also necessary for lots of other cell processes. For example, nerve cells need to pump sodium out against the concentration and potassium into the cells. Amino acids, as we saw, are absorbed using active transport. Calcium ions need to be in high concentration in cardiac muscle so that cardiac muscle can contract without tiring. Diffusing glucose either into the cell or out of the cell requires energy. White blood cells engulfing a bacteria in your immune system requires energy. Secreting enzymes through vesicles, all that requires energy, like forming the membrane around it. And exocytosis, that's all going to require some energy. Releasing antibodies requires energy. Neurotransmitters, which are chemicals that cross a small gap between one nerve cell and the next, reabsorbing those or releasing those, that all requires ATP. We get that ATP from cellular respiration. Here's an example of the sodium-potassium pump for nerve cells. So nerve cells are pumping against the concentration gradient, pumping sodium out of the cell and pumping potassium into the cell. You'll notice that 3 atoms of sodium are pumped out for every 2 atoms of potassium that are pumped in, and it requires ATP to do that. As a result, there's a positive charge on the outside of that nerve cell and a negative charge on the inside of that nerve cell. That overall positive charge on the outside and negative charge on the inside allows an action potential. That is a reversal of those charges so that your nerve can send a signal along that nerve to release neurotransmitters, and that communicates with the rest of your body. Hopefully, that helps you see the relationship between homeostasis, respiration, and diffusion, and how those are important for maintaining internal balance, whether it's your body, a system, or a cell.